Alright, so your supersol chords don't sound as good as the pros because they're setting up their chords in a different way that you are, and they're also probably designing their supersol synth slightly differently. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you the way that I have been producing very powerful supersols for the last year and a half. Let's get into it. Alrighty, we are rolling. It's time to open up FL Studio and create some killer supersol. What I'm going to do to start is place down the chords the way that I talked about before. So we're going to start with the root. I'm going to just use F minor for things, just because that's the melody I can improvise the best in piano. So I write a lot of my music in F minor, just works well for me. We're going to do a root, we're going to go up a third, and then I'm just going to kind of make a chord progression that sounds good in my head. So dum, dum, bum, bum. Just sing it out, draw it out, and then I'm going to duplicate these root notes, and I'm going to throw them up a fifth. So fifth is going to be 7 notes up the piano or 5 notes up the scale, and that's now going to sound like this. We've heard this before. I assume most of the people that I'm talking to understand how fifths work. Next, we're going to use thirds, and I'm just going to make some adjustments to keep them in the key, and that's going to end up sounding like this. So overall, just a little bit more full, but one thing that we can do to spice it up is move the third up an octave. So there's a little secret for you. Put the third up an octave, now that sounds like this. Again, just a little bit more powerful. All right, and then following our procedure, we're going to do the same thing, but down an octave. And that already is sounding much more full and cohesive. The other thing that I really like to do is if you want to give your chord more emotions, you can add in more notes on the very top of chords, call it sevenths or ninths. I don't look at things too technically. I do whatever sounds best in my head. And these can be great for pulling the listener into like a good sounding melody off of just these extra notes in your chords. It adds some more, I think, uniqueness to them that a lot of other artists don't imply. So if I listen to this chord, which is our first one, or one chord, I'm going to just throw down a note above all these notes and try to keep it close to the top note, but I'm just going to move it around, find what sounds best. Just stick with me. Right, there's a little more emotion there than before when we had just this. So this chord sounds fine, but I really like that kind of sound. I'm just gonna continue doing that. Yeah, there's a little bit more feeling involved, a little bit of a different emotion. Okay, so now that we have our chords drawn out in MIDI, we need to actually create this supersol. There's 2 ways to do supersol. The first one is to take the normal sol layer and duplicate it a bunch of times, and then detune those different layers. It's kind of funny because if you've ever played in an orchestra, they try to tune every one to be in key. What we're doing here is we're creating a whole bunch of, say, different cellos or different violins, but then we're making sure 50% of them play in key, but then the other 50% play a little bit out of key, sharp little out of key flat, so overall you have more of a chorus effect, and then the actual chords sound a little bit more powerful. So check this out. I'm going to create 5 layers here in Serum. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see what I'm working with. 5 layers in Serum is going to sound like this when we make it a little more detuned. And then, I mean, we can just throw in a little bit of multi-band compression, a little bit of reverb, a little bit of delay. And this is your standard way you'd make supersol. And then we add a lot of emotion to it with, say, a low pass or a high pass filter. A low pass filter is going to sound like this. And a high pass filter is going to sound a little bit more like this. They're great for build-ups, for making different parts of the chords kind of fade away to give more room for vocals in the mix, and just lots of other creative techniques. For now, I'm just going to stick with making the most powerful super saw that I possibly can, which means I'm going to make it a little bit different than this normal standard technique. Let's create a normal serum patch. I've just got a saw wave, back to what we had before, and I'm going to wiggle the actual pitch of the saw wave back and forth really quickly to create the normal detune that we had before, and have it changing that pitch super fast. Let's do it a little bit more aggressively by putting it to the coarse pitch. So I have a patch that I've made in my sample pack off of AU5's super saw that mimics this really well. And I'm using white noise as part of that kind of randomness in the changes in pitch, but basically allows me to create a super saw that sounds a little bit like this. So when I adjust how detuned the super saw is, or I'm adding that kind of power between this sound and this sound, all I'm doing is increasing the range that those saw waves are moving up and down in pitch. So back to the concept of having a good super saw, I'm going to make the lowest notes pretty much non-detune, and then as we go higher up throughout the octaves, we're going to make it a little bit wider and a little bit more aggressive sounding. So the trick to do that, for me, I've found, is to make an extra duplicate of the chords, and we're going to throw these up an octave and make them a little bit more detuned. So this is going to be the higher octave. Sorry, let me put it up an octave. And that's kind of gritty, kind of almost annoying to your ears, but once we throw in the lower octave below that, maybe that's a little too much detune. It sounds a little bit more full. I'm also going to throw in just an extra saw octave to fill in some of the low frequencies. And then the killer section to this is to add in a good sub bass. I have this super saw stack sub that I've created where I just have a sine wave changing pitch real quick downwards, so it has sort of a attack similar to what a kick drum has. And that sounds like this if I play it high. If you can't hear these lower notes, like this, you need better headphones because you need to be able to monitor bass. If you're playing it out of speakers, you're probably not going to hear these low notes that I'm placing down, but if you are wearing headphones or have a subwoofer, you should be able to feel this bass. Oop, sorry, one octave too low. All right, I'm playing it now. In terms of now mixing everything together, I'm going to send each of these layers to their own mixing track. This is what it sounds like right now. Not bad, but I am clipping in the saw layer, so I'm going to bring down these levels. Let's listen to each one separately and make some adjustments. Not bad. If I check an EQ, we'll notice the distribution is pretty flat across the frequency spectrum, so I'm fine with that. Let's now look at the higher super saw. Check on an EQ. If you notice, there's all this noise down in the low end. You see all these little kind of moving frequencies popping up. That's just adding extra gunk that we don't want. Don't worry, we're going to distort soon, and that's going to add all sorts of extra madness to things. So I'm using a high-pass filter to remove those lower frequencies that are just taking up extra range that we don't need. So it already sounds a little bit cleaner. Let's throw in the sub bass and have all of these tracks route to insert 8. Now if I turn on insert 8, I can now adjust how loud the sub, the high super saw, and the lower super saw is in order to perfect my mix. So I'm going to probably have a little bit higher super saw to mid super saw, make sure that the bass is nice and loud. It's not going to matter too much because we're going to compress everything in a moment. That sounds good. Now for compression, we're going to use over-the-top compression, or OTT, and that's going to sound a little bit like this. And then for distortion, we're going to use camel pressure. And I'm going to turn it down quite a bit, just a little bit of distortion on top of everything. And then if you really want to be creative, there's a couple of things we can do to give it that extra 10%. One, we can increase the high-end presence to make it hiss a little bit more. For that, you can either boost the highs in an EQ, or I like this plugin called Fresh Air, just because it controls which highs it boosts to not be too harsh in your ears. You can hear the difference between it on and off. All right, then we're going to use a plugin called Grosbeat in order to adjust the amplitude of the signal coming in. So I could do cool effects such as this like trance effect. And there's all sorts of like fun presets that are in here. For example, like a good side chain. If you don't have a plugin like Kickstart to do side chain. For that pumping, driving rhythm for dance music. For me, because we just want to show how powerful these chords are, we're going to mimic the human voice, and when the human voice is really loud, it starts to shake, so we're going to use a tremolo in the exact same way. So it's going to sound a little bit like this. And you can experiment with these things, tweak them, do whatever works best for you based upon the track that you're producing. But this is the final Supercell product. All right, so as you see, the process itself isn't super difficult. You pretty much just have to stick to that method, play around with it a little bit, maybe throw on your own flair, your own uniqueness, and you should be able to create super powerful supercells, and then with that, super powerful super music. But I mean, that's pretty much it from me. If you want more electronic dance music tips, just hit that subscribe button. Peace.